October the 4th, 1919. I was born on the property, my granddad's property, where the house and everything is gone. So if I was to get famous, they'd have to put up a plaque there. And it was on the corner of Harwood and Bonanza, isn't it, road?
Mm-hmm. Oh.
And
so that's over near where we used to be.
Yeah. And I went to, I probably went to
country school?
I was going to say six schools, or at least.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes. I started at the Brett School, and right side of where Tony McCall lived there. I went to school with Owen and Doris and Burton McCall, which lived right side of the school. Then my folks moved to Grand Rapids, and I went to Coit, which is the oldest school in Grand Rapids. And then I went to Michigan School. I went to Oakdale School. As a matter of fact, my folks had a little problem being transient. We moved 19 times in 20 years.
Gee, isn't that something?
So I didn't really make a very permanent attachment.
I didn't realize that.
So we came back to Lake Odessa in 29, when the Depression knocked everybody's socks off. We come back to Lake Odessa to the farm, and then I started in 7th grade at Lake Odessa with Bessie Graw. And I couldn't have got off to a better start, because anything that I thought I knew, she took that away, you know. And then I went to the 8th grade to Luna Pickens, and God bless them two women, they got us all ready for high school. And they definitely did, got us ready for high school. I was a fair to average student. I had a problem in school, I had a good time. And then my last year, I fell in love. I left school in my senior year, and Phyllis Lowry and I got married. We hitchhiked to Grand Rapids and got married. That was our wedding trip. We walked to a preacher's house in Grand Rapids, and we're married. Then I worked for a fellow with parking lots and parking garages in Grand Rapids. One of the sharper men I was ever around, Earl Andrus. He done a lot for us. Then we decided to go out to the farm, and we started to become entrepreneurs. I went to the bank in Bill McCartney in Lake Odessa and borrowed $500, and Bill McCartney gave me 5 years to pay it back. I didn't know that my dad had said, but because I wouldn't borrow from the family, I'm going to do it myself, you know. I didn't know my dad had said let him have it, because I wasn't old enough to borrow money yet, you know.
Collar signed it or something.
Yeah, well, can you imagine? $500 for 5 years. Of course, there was no money floating anywhere.
How old were you when you did that?
18.
18.
So Phyllis and I went to farming. We farmed with my folks a while. Then we rented Doc Kaufman's 40 acres. As a definition of the times, we rented 40 acres, house, and barn for $100 a year. Can you, in those days? Tom times were gradually trying to get a little better. Phyllis done whatever she could with what we had, and I farmed it, and I worked for Al Beeler, drove truck when Jerry was just a little kid, Ruth to ride with me. And then that fall we went to, Ralph Peer wanted me to rent his farm, which was west of Lake Odessa. And we went out there and the war broke out. They started playing the Star-Spangled Banner and waving the flag and all that stuff, and I was trying to learn how to fly at that time. Found out I had a little natural aptitude. And so we just talked it over, and I decided to go try and get into flying with the service. I went to Grand Rapids to the old armory on Michigan Street, and they called 50 of us. 5 of us passed the exam. Then I had to wait until one of the service schools, flying schools, was open. I was assigned to the Randolph Field System down in San Antonio. They called me in March of that year and sent me to San Antonio. Phyllis was at home with 2 babies and expecting another one. So probably the best soldier in the family was her. But she did...
Is that right, Phyllis?
But she followed me wherever I went in the service. Didn't complain. She was also expecting another baby. I had to go to what they called the SAC Center in San Antonio. Sad Sacks, they called us. And we had to wait until the next school opened up. We had to go first to the, what they call it anyway, the book, no, the book learning end of it. And that's where I really had to grind. I didn't even have a high school education. And I did lie about that to get in the service, or they wouldn't have took me. So the only place that I could study at night that there was a light on, after all lights out at 9 o'clock in the service, I used to go sit on the john, and there's always a light on in the toilet and study, see. But I had the bug really bad, and I done mediocre in all of the intellectual end of it. And we went to, for our first flight school, we went to Cimarron Field in Oklahoma. Well, it turned out to be a garden spot. I hit a civilian instructor, and he was a fellow that was flying tri-motors in Peru when the war broke out. And he came home to fly and had thousands of hours, and he couldn't pass the physical.
He's an older guy, was he?
Not so much older, but some older, of course. He, so he kind of took me under his wing and knew I needed some help, and so I passed that school.
Now, what kind of airplanes?
We were flying PT-19s.
Open cockpit?
Yeah, oh, certainly. Lindbergh stuff, you know, with a white scarf and a tie-down helmet and the whole bit, and the instructor talked to you through a Gosport tube. You didn't have any radio or anything. And you really learned how to fly because they even covered up everything but the engine instruments, so that you really flew by the seat of your pants. You know.
Did you have a rotary, not rotary, a radial engine?
No, it was an inline engine. It looked like a little P-51.
Yeah.
Fairchild made them.
Neat little plane.
Oh, neat little plane with a Franklin inline engine.
Franklin, that's the word.
Yeah, and it flew nice. And one of the instructors I had was, we called him Speedy Needy. He was one of these fellows that, being a cadet, you went and stood by the side of the plane at attention till he got in and all buckled up and ready to go, you know. Then he wanted you in there. You get your leg thrown over into the cockpit, and he's taking off, see. He was that kind of a guy, you know. But I tell you what, he got you so you'd really hustle, you know. That was our test pilot. The civilians, which helped us a lot, were training pilots. And they used to laugh because some of those training pilots had thousands of hours, where the check pilots for the service had a few hundred hours.
A little bit more than you guys.
Yeah, they were just ahead of us, you might say.
Did you have a lot of accidents?
We lost one fellow in that school. They had us go over an intersection on the road, a 90-degree intersection, and fly what they called at 500 feet, and you flew lazy eights. In other words, you made the center of your eight was over the intersection always, and you tried to perfect that until it was. And a farmer working below this guy at 500 feet, he could see pretty much what's going on, and it was running about 105 degrees out there in Oklahoma. And those airplanes were low wing, and he's setting up there right out in the open, you know. And it looked to the farmer like he just disappeared into the cockpit, and she went in.
Passed out.
Very possible that it was, and you got engine heat and everything, and it's very possible that
he didn't have a whole lot of accidents in primary.
Well, you wiped out here and there a landing gear or that sort of thing. Yeah, oh, certainly. When you got that many, 200 young men, that a lot of them fresh from the plow, you know, it's a little tough to. I know my instructor, he was trying to learn me to fly by the stick like you should, and he'd make me put my fingers on top of it, and just, you know, because I was stronger than he was, and he couldn't take it away from me, see? And so he'd holler, "Farmer, let go of that stick," you know. And anyway, we got, Cimarron Field was good to us as cadets. Then we went to Garden City, Kansas, right out in the Dust Belt, where the old Dust Bowl was, and we run into all military. And they were instrument planes, and one of my friends that was flying with me was Robert E. Riley, who was the sports editor at that time for the Detroit Free Press, and his wife was society editor. And Riley and I, you weren't supposed to do aerobatics or dogfight, but we'd go off over the Canadian River and fight one another, see, him and I. One day while we were flying, a fella joined in with another plane, and geez, he was better than we were. He's on our tail all the time, you know. It dawned on me, this isn't normal, you know. So I went back to the base, but Riley, being an Irishman, he stayed. He's going to fight this dude, you know. When they got back to base, it's the chief of flight, and we aren't supposed to be flying these instrument planes like that, you know. So he just gave Riley 100 hours on the punishment, or gigs they called them, you know, which is the flagpole, and it had a sidewalk about a half a block square around it, and there was always somebody walking it, and you had to walk off in your spare time. 100 hours is a long time, you know.
With a rifle on your shoulder?
Yeah, oh, sure, though, and full dress.
Full
white
dress?
spats, oh, absolutely, 100 degrees, and white spats.
Like you were in front of the...
Oh, that
soldier.
flagpole is a general, you know. And Riley's was from Detroit, Michigan, and his father had been a Canadian Army officer in World War I. And what happens next? Riley ain't got any spare time. He's got to be out there all the time. All of a sudden, he comes rushing over to me, and he gets a cable in those days from his father, and they're coming to visit him and his mother. See? Well, he was about my size, and so I said, well, we'll try it. I'll go out and walk the gigs for you when they're here, see. So the guy also a cadet, who was in charge at that time, and they kept a book on it. I'd go up and report as Robert E. Riley, and he knew I wasn't. He would never look up at me. He'd always look at the book, you know. and I walked off his gigs for him. In the meantime, Phyllis had had our baby then, and no, you didn't have that till I got to. Yes, you did. Certainly, you came out there with her. Garden City. So she come out to her and my mother came on the train because I had never seen this baby, you see, and I'm ready to go overseas. I would never see it, maybe. So they came out there, and I went to the colonel, and a cadet, by the way, doesn't leave the base. 9.5 weeks, you're
Right there.
no smoking, no cokes, no nothing, you know. We had the old class system then, upper and lower classmen. But I went and reported to him, and I said, my wife's in town with a baby I've never seen, and I want to go see her. He says, you know the rules. Cadets stay on the base. And I said, well, I'm going to go see that baby, so you can plan on it then, you know. And he said, you mean that, don't you? And I said, oh, absolutely. I'll go over the fence. I'm going to go see that baby. So he reluctantly said, I'm going to give you a pass. So he gave me a pass to save my hide, probably. And Phil was out there then. They let me go in weekends, and she was out there with that baby, which tickled me to death. We had quite a few accidents in basic. That's our first closed canopied airplane.
BT-6?
No, not then. BT-13. Vultee vibrator, they called them. It was the first sheet metal plane we'd ever flown, and everything on it was a wartime airplane, and everything rattled on it, and they called it a Vultee vibrator.
But it had a canopy.
Yeah, but it had a double canopy over it. I had a good friend that, because the Army placed it alphabetically, his name was Schwimmer, red-headed fella, and every day he got sick in the PTs, and he got so clever that he could put it into a skid and throw up, and it would all go away, you know. And but he was a good flyer. He says, well, Shelley, I'm going to wash myself out. I can never go under a canopy, you know. And I said, well, give it a shot. What the heck? So he did, and he never got sick after that wind quit hitting him in the face.
Is that right?
Yeah. And he graduated finally.
He called you Shelley. Huh?
Yeah. Oh, nobody's going to tackle Shellenbarger. But anyway, yeah, there was Shelley, Seaford, and Schwimmer, and Shellenbarger, and they called us the Irishmen, you know, alphabetically, the service. From there, we went to advanced school, and then we flew different twin engines, bamboo bombers, they called them, all fabric covered, wartime airplane.
Beach 18,
yeah, beaches and everything, whatever they had, you know. It's hard for people to visualize that they were dragging airplanes in there that they had give up on almost. The Army was, you know, you've heard the old wooden gun stories. Well, they were without, and it was in the wintertime then. And man, if you ever been around Amarillo in Pampa, Texas, in the Panhandle, you know, well, they always said that Admiral Byrd was from that area, and when he hit the South Pole, he says, boy, I'll bet it's cold in Amarillo, you know. But anyway, we flew those out of there and had pretty good luck then. But they had simmered us down. Well, in basic school, we had 40 men in our barracks, and when they got done, there was 16 left.
Washed out a lot of
Washed, oh, they just washed. But usually it was for their own good. It was either they weren't, that wasn't their thing, or some of them were physicals, you know, and attitude and the whole works. And probably we used to say they were the smart ones. They got them, they didn't have to go with it. But anyway, primary school, we graduated the 7th of January. And we got into town with a 6x6, and the train couldn't make it through the snowbanks, And so we were coming home and couldn't get out of this little town.
What year was that?
44.
44.
44A, the first class in 44. Finally we got home. Well, when I graduated, the weird part started was they called 200 of us, went into the theater, and they passed out our wings and our credentials. And they missed a fellow named Robert E. Evans and a fellow named Claud Shellenbarger didn't graduate. And with them, and I thought, oh boy. Well, what I was afraid of all the time, I had lied about my education, see. And they caught it in advanced school, finally caught up with me. And they called me in front of a board, and they said, we understand that you lied about your education. And I said, yes. And he said, well, you know, that's automatic. And I said, well, so I went after it. I had nothing to lose, you know. I said, you've invested $30,000 or so in me so far, and I have maintained my status in the class, and I had guts enough to do it. I said, you fellows ought to have guts enough to give me a chance. Well, they looked at me quite a while. Finally, the senior officer stood up and said, we're going to keep you, but he said, you make one mistake, you're dead, you know. So they made a pretty good soldier out of me.
You had to really be careful.
Yeah, do it right, you know. So then we graduated, finally got home, and my orders, after everybody else graduated, they called us two up on the stage and says, there's a special project, and these two fellows have been sent, or to be sent to Shreveport, Louisiana. We didn't even know where it was. So we graduated. I came home. Then I went to Shreveport, and got down to Shreveport, and it's Navy navigation. In the first class, they give us 90 hours of navigation in 10 days. Now, you can't absorb it that fast. No, the human mind don't work that way. But anyway, that was hurry-up war stuff. They had... then they explained to us that we were going to go forget everything the Army taught you about navigation and all that. You're going to be under Navy navigation, nautical, celestial, and that bit. We took our navigation studies there, and then they sent us to, well, first of all, we wound up in Pascagoula, Coast Guard. Got there, and the Coast Guard says, what the devil you guys doing here? We haven't got any way of training you. Know? So then they sent us to, Gulfport. And that's quite a big Navy town.
Mississippi.
Yes, and they said, we have no facilities, and we have no orders for this. So they said, we'll get a hold of some people. And pretty soon they said, go to Pensacola. So we went to Pensacola to the main base, which was a beautiful base, you know. We finally got in to see the chief of flight there, and he says, what the devil you guys doing here? We two Army officers staggering around in that Navy base, you know, not too welcome even. And so finally some more guys came in from around the United States. There was 8 of us finally. And they said, okay, we'll put you in Squadron 8A. And Squadron 8A was French, several South American countries, 2 or 3 of each, you know. It was a conglomeration, you know. And they were all there to get seaplane training. And they said, the only way we'll take you, you got to do the Navy cadet. Well, I felt like I'd been hamstrung. I just went through all of that. Yeah, and they put us right back into cadet training. Put us in the PBY program. We started out in old PBY 2s, which had no wheels on them, and they used to have to pull them ashore with a tractor, old Fordson tractors. And we learned celestial there. As a matter of fact, another fellow and I had to do some star shots at night and you had to get away from the surrounding lights, and we took our wives and went down on the beach, and we're trying to do some work, you know, with sextant, and all of a sudden we're surrounded by SPs. What do you got? Yes, what do you got? See, we'd take a shot, and then we'd take our flashlight and read our, and from the distance it looked like a bunch of signals. Remember that, fella?
Yes.
And here we are on the beach surrounded by these dudes, and they were gentle about it. Said, "Get your hind end out of here," see? Because at that time, submarines were coming up in the Gulf, see? So then we quit that little routine, but anyway, they worked us pretty hard, worked us good. We graduated with a class of 200 naval cadets, 1 Marine major, got into flight training some way there, 8 Army officers. And now they always told us that that was Ted Williams's class, but at that time we didn't even know who he was, you know. So then I got leave, and by the way, we lived in a sharecropper's shack. Yeah, Phyllis came to.
Yeah, Pensacola.
She came down there in March that year. It was a snowstorm in Michigan, and when she hit Pensacola, there was roses growing right on Main Street, you know, and she said, "This is it." But anyway, we lived in a little sharecropper's shack. That's all we could find. And our kids were there, and really we kind of played, had a good time. Then they said that we're going to send you to Biloxi, Mississippi, to Keesler Field. So we got down to Biloxi, go see the colonel there, chief of flight, and he said, "All I got's orders to give you guys Hangar 1, and you're going to start the 7th Emergency Rescue Squadron." We went out to Hangar 1, and there wasn't even a chair in that hangar. Not a thing. The Army didn't want us. They just cleaned it out. So we had to go get our airplanes. Well, they delivered them part way from Vickers Armstrong in Canada. Nobody in the United States had them, see. And we drawed, each one of us drawed a 6-man crew, complete with ourselves. And we started our own training program, procedures, see.
This is Army now.
Yes, now we're back with the Army. So we'd done a lot of work around Biloxi there. And they start sending us down to Cuba and back on this submarine thing. At Pascagoula over here, which is on the way to Sanibel, I was off from that. The only reason I knew it was there because it was a Coast Guard station.
Wait a minute now. You said Pascagoula. You mean Pine Island?
No, well, Pascagoula is where you go to Sanibel.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, there's a little just a dock there now.
Oh, I see.
And that used
that was in Mississippi.
That used to be. Did I say Pascagoula? Ponderosa.
Ponderosa.
Ponderosa. Okay. Ponderosa. And that's the only way I would know where it happened. And they had called me and said that I was going to have to go inland somewhere because the fog was hanging so heavy. If I could stay contact, I could come back in. See, well, I wanted to go home. So I'm coming right down on the water trying to get in.
Under the fog.
Under the fog to stay contact, you know. And went right over a submarine out there. And he's got his laundry up, and there's guys up, and it's diving, and thank God there was trash on deck because the Coast Guard rushed out there when I called and found all their orange crates and stuff floating around out there. Otherwise, they'd have said I had an illusion or something. And I bet they questioned me until midnight about it, and they wanted to know how long it was, and I saw it maybe that long, you know. You're going 150 miles an hour, about 500 feet, and it's gone.
Just happened to fly right
It
smack
flew
dab
right over him, and he evidently had heard us before we got to him, and he was already about half submerged. See, but it was kind of interesting.
The laundry got wet on that.
They left their laundry right up, and well, anyway, we stayed there. We must have been there 2 or 3 months then. Can't just tell. And then all of a sudden they come and looking for me and said, "Get your gear together. You're going to Vladivostok, Russia." Well, the Russians hadn't let anybody in, you know, and they were having that trouble, Kodiak Island trouble, and the only thing you could use up there was P-boats, land-based planes, because we had more ability, you know, as far as getting down and getting up and all that. So I got all the shots that the Russians said I had to take, got all winterized, drawed all the winter equipment, drawed all the winter medical supplies, and all ready to go. Sent her home to Michigan. They come back and said, "Well, Russia won't let us in." That would have been quite an experience.
Yeah. You were going to go up through Alaska?
Yeah, across the Bering Sea, and that would have been quite an experience, you know, because the Russians weren't letting people in, see. So something went sour. So I turned that stuff all back in, got all checked out, and I said, "Well, I won't be doing nothing. I guess I'll go home, you know." They said, "There's a little something. You go to French Guiana. Tom Harmon just crashed in the jungle down there."
Go look for him,
Huh?
Go
look for him. That's all they knew about it, because of the language barriers and communication. And I'm to go to Trinidad and get my instructions. So loaded her up, and we took off from Morrison Field in Florida and went by the way of the islands, Puerto Rico and down. I got into French Guiana, had a heck of a time. They speak Portuguese down there. Finding the American consulate to get somebody to talk to me. My big problem was that I'm going to set up a square search in the area that he supposedly went down, and every big shot there wanted to go long, you know, in the French Guiana group. And so we're hammering that out. I wanted some observers that knew the country, see, but I didn't want these guys with scrambled egg and stuff. But anyway, we get all ready to go look from Tom Harmon. The word comes out he's walked out, and he ain't even in there, see. He got a little bad publicity about that. We don't never know the particulars, but he was in a B-25, and the pilot don't get out of one of those, and he was the only one that got out.
Really?
Yes. Now, you and I don't have any way of knowing what the circumstances were, see. And then what do I do when I get in China? I got to go find Tom Harmon again, and he crashed that time, and then he couldn't get a crew. People wouldn't fly with him.
Is that right?
And here he had been our All-American, you know.
University of Michigan.
Yes. Yeah. But anyway, and still you don't know the particulars.
Was that the deal down there in French Guiana? Was that on the water? Did he crash?
No, he was in the jungle. See?
Crashed right in the
jungle?
jungle?
Yeah.
He's the only
Now, he went down in the jungle area. I never did see where he went down or anything. But but of course down there, the jungle area is water, waist deep, you know, a lot of it, and that's where it was. But anyway, so while I'm down there at loose ends then, they sent me word to go to Belém, Brazil, and I did, and they said, you go to Natal and pick up orders to go to Ascension Island. So we were farm kids, you know. We didn't know where Ascension Island was hardly, you know. I had a terrific navigator, one of the very best, and that was the secret of everything. So then we got ready to go to Ascension, which is only a dot out in the South Atlantic, you know. And we could set on the runway at Natal and pick up the beam off of an Ascension Island.
Natal is in Brazil.
Yes, right on the Bulge. See, they sent me out there, and then that was where they were ferrying airplanes to the southern route.
Walt flew a B-26 or was co-pilot on a B-26 across that
Around there.
flight.
Okay. Now, the trouble with my flights, every flight I took, they made me check the flight records of who's going, and I'd have to take off because I was slow ahead of them, and then stay on radio contact so they could mayday me, see?
Mm-hmm.
And so going from there to Ascension, from the next morning I went from Ascension to Accra in Africa, and I got 25 airplanes ahead of me, all
Now, are these like B-26s?
anything, whatever they're ferrying, see?
Or whatever?
But all they wanted to know that this old Goonie bird is out there,
Fish 'em out.
that they could call me, see? It was interesting, but that's a little boring after a while, because I'd like to listen to some music and stuff instead of that crackle all day long, you know. But anyway, we got to Accra, and the amusing thing in Accra, I got there just at dusk. Nobody said anything to me, and I went in to land, and I set her down good. Everything went fine. All of a sudden, I'm flying. And then it set back down, and I called the tower right away, and I said, I don't know just what the problem. Oh, he said, forgot to tell you, it says there's a hump in the middle of that runway. It's like this, you know. So I flew right off the end of that hump and set it back down again, see.
Huh.
Anyway,
Is that in North Africa?
That's
I'm
in-
not familiar with that.
yeah, that's in Liberia, and well, right on the bulge in Africa there. There's two closest points. Then they had two, I went across the Sahara then, had El Fasher and Maiduguri, which were two dots in the sand, is all that we had to jump these planes, see. And when I got to Maiduguri, I got into a hammertan, which is a sandstorm. And it was about 7,000 feet. I could fly above it, but I had to go down through it to this. And we made maybe 6 passes at that airport before we found it. And the boys were shooting flares. They had all their jeeps sitting around the strip and everything, trying to illuminate a little bit. And I got down, and no more, and we were tickled to death, you know, and all of a sudden the tower called me and said, we want to talk to that pilot right away. So I went up there. There's a limey in the area with a 24. He made 13 passes and missed that airport. And he was getting panicky when you're talking to you, you know. So he said, would you talk with him? You've done it, and about when you hit the cone of silence, what you adjusted to and so forth. So I got onto it with him, and I said, hi, Jocko, and I said, I just come down through. Fun, ain't it? And he, you know how them limeys talk. And I said, you ever been to the United States? He ain't a bit interested, you know. I said, you know anything about Babe Ruth? And he began to talk with me then. I said, go to the cone of silence, take 19 degrees, and start letting her down. And if you know a good prayer, say that one too. And I got him to talk with me. So then he come down, and boy, he landed. Blowed a tire, but he got her down. And I never forget one of the crew members, the next morning, they're out there when hammertan's gone, weather, you just like fog or anything, you know. The next morning, we ready to get around the flight line and deciding who's going where. And one of the crewmen, they had him in the corner. He ain't going. He ain't going. You know.
Court-martial.
Yeah, he ain't going. Court-martial if you want. I ain't going, you know. Well, they finally got him calmed down, and he went. But I often think about it. Emotionally, he had cracked, you know.
And that was a B-24.
He was in a 24, and that's bad business. We could handle low altitude. We were built for it, but he's got a, you know, he's got a big chunk of iron, and he's got to go, you know. And we ate lunch together there, and at Maiduguri, and this limey pilot, you know, and he's sitting there, and I know, and he's got something on his fork, and he's going like this. He says, "Look at there, look at there." You know, he was still flying, you know. He said, "Look at that," and he put his hand down, you know. unconsciously, when you look down, he's, you know, but that's what happened to him. We had, so then I went to, at the base of the Red Sea, what's that? Used to be a British protectorate, Aden, Protectorate of Aden, A-D-E-N. I went to Aden, and when I was there, the guys loading our fuel and doing different things for us, and there was so many of them, fingers off, hand off, around there, and her dad, of course, was a one-armed man, Charlie, and I was used to that, but I noticed it, you know. Finally, I said to one of the officers, I said, what's all this, what's getting all these, that's, if you're caught stealing, they take a finger off, you know. Get you twice, they take two, or they'll take a hand. And he said, they don't have very much stealing. And I imagine it would be. The evidence would be right there all your life, you know. And for a country kid, that your eyeballs get about that big. Yeah. So then we went to to Oman, Oil Protectorate. That's the only place outside of Iceland that you can't fly an American flag. The potentate there won't let you put American any foreign flag up there. I thought that was kind of interesting, you know. And that airport was right in the desert, sand. And when you land there, they're in a thing, you know. Not even hardly any buildings. Everything is in the ground. And our airplanes, the minute we landed, here come an outfit, they covered it right up, the engines, sand.
Oh, sand.
Yes. And I had never been around that, of course. We went from there to Karachi, India, and they told us to go to Agratella, which was in Bangladesh. You couldn't even find it on the map. It's nothing but a dot, you know. But the military had it, and amusing thing there, see, all of us eventually made this route, and one of the guys of the Hap Arnold, his name was, not the general, rescue airplane, what's he do but get lost? And spent the night on the Irrawaddy River, you know, landed. That was the nice part about having a flying boat, until he found out. He stayed all night with his crew did, with a rancher there. Guy's got a plantation, tea plantation, and so he never lived that down, you know. Don't send Hap, you know. A nice guy, too. When we got to Agratella, that's an Australian base, and we were working strictly off of their base. We were being sent there for the Battle of Rangoon. Burma was being fought over. The Australians, great flyers, great soldiers, heavy drinkers, and they were flying our war wearies. After we throwed airplanes away, they were patching them up. That was their Air Force, you know. And they'd done a lot of good work. And then we took part in the Battle of Rangoon. Because all of the facilities were destroyed, we had to go in on the river with everything for them, and we done a lot of that type of thing. And when Rangoon really fell, the Limeys dropped Gurkhas in there. You know, little Gurkha soldiers. And the Limeys would come out with a boat to get stuff that I had brought in on the river. And I said, how is it in town? And he said, well, it's better. He said the Gurkhas, they parachuted them in there, landed. The Japs stacked their rifles and hit the brush.
Quit right there.
Yeah. And he said the Gurkhas were running around town looking for a Jap with that big knife, you know. And the word got out, and he said psychologically, that was the end of it, you know, just cleaned them right out.
They were tough fighters, weren't they?
Maybe the only real fighters in the world, they were, but the trouble is they were for sale, you know. They were strictly mercenaries. And they take their women and everything right with them when they go to war. And I had a Gurkha guarding an airplane for me and in a revetment. And I had just got out of it and went with a weapons carrier over to the ready room. And then I forgot something on the plane, and so I just had him run me back over there. And he ain't letting me in that airplane because he'd been put on duty, and I didn't know the password yet. And I said, well, and he just,
No way.
and all he does, he draws that little knife out and holds it up in front of his face like, and you know, I believed him right away. Now, the weird part, for a stranger, they don't draw that knife unless they draw blood, you know.
Is that right?
And he'd go like that, and cut his finger just a little bit and draw blood and put his knife away, you know.
That's
I went over and got the password, came back, I could go in the airplane. I felt pretty good about that because my airplane was being pretty well looked after.
I guess.
Yeah, you know.
That's something.
We went from there to, well, I went for a time up to Kunming, China with Chennault's outfit. It's hard for us to visualize, and of course I knew nothing about it. I'm just going where I'm told. But we had the Japs thinking that we're going to travel and invade China on the soft belly of China, around Hainan Island. And we actually had OSS men dropped in there, walking the beaches, measuring the water depth, and I was flying them in and out of there. And that was all a charade, see. Well, then when I'd come back, they had these observers with me, and here would be these roads, country-type roads, dust all up the road. And the Japs were moving equipment in there like crazy, see. And these Americans, they're going to hit us, and that would have been a logical place, see. It was low land and level, and we had people measuring the cemeteries. They make the cemeteries into landing fields, you know. And what they hit was Okinawa. And that's what throwed the Japs off. They really fortified that much closer to the Philippines and everything, see.
A little misinformation there.
Well, that does it. That's MacArthur's type of thing, you know. But so then all of a sudden, I'm done with the Chennault's outfit up there, and they said, "You guys all go to the Philippines, Clark Field." When we got to the Philippines, there was men in battle gear all under the airplane wings all over out there. They were getting ready for the assault, you know. So then they made the assault on Okinawa, and then our job was to, anybody get hit, the pilots, they'd fly out and Mayday, you know, for us to get them, pick them up.
Pick them up.
Yeah, and so then we finally were sent to go right into, it would be better for us to work, not so much distance, right into Buckner Bay in Okinawa, and the Seabees, the Seabees said that the strip's in good shape. So we went up there and dragged over the strip, you know. It would be like landing in here if you're crying out loud, you know. And so I called their radio truck and said, we can't come down there. And an old sergeant starts in, you know. You goddamn city flyers, you know, and think you got to have all this stuff. And so I said, run a grader over that thing. And so they finally dragged the big rocks out of the way and what have you. And we went and we stayed there. 2 typhoons hit us, wiped us out, you know, supply-wise and everything else.
Any kamikazes?
No, but we had, the Japs were getting desperate then, and they were even sneaking in the early mess lines. They'd get a dead American's coveralls, flight cover, and get right in the mess line, you know, early or late and that sort of thing. And so they, but they were desperate then. And my outfit went in, and here is the nicest, levelest spot, and we're going to put our tents up, see. So we put up tents, and we're all set. Along comes an Army engineer guy and says, you guys got to move. I said, geez, man, we just got in here, you know. He said, you're sitting on a Japanese ammo dump. They had just covered it up. They had just covered it up, see, and it looked all leveled off. Seemed like an ideal place, you know. but it didn't take us long to move.
Well, it's a good place to sleep.
Yeah, well, you can move in a hurry if you have to. And so we moved to a hilly area. Well, I was on some missions. We had our tent winterized. We thought we were going to spend the winter, door and floor and that sort of. So the Seabees come along and said, "You got to take 8 tents out of here, you know." I said, "Wait a minute, man, I got to go on a flight." "Okay, that's your problem." When I came back, these dirty bastards, they had cut the dirt. My tent set right up on it. They had graded, and they're standing around giggling, you know. And Christ, it was 12 feet up there to my tent, and it hadn't touched it, hadn't hurt anything. So then we had to get a payloader and get our stuff down on there. He told me, "That's your problem, you know. You just cut it all away."
Did you fish out very many Navy pilots that were
Well, yeah.
Okinawa there?
Mostly Marine pilots out of, they were Corsairin, you know, they worked good there. PBY is supposed to be good for about 8 open sea landings, the life of it.
Is that right?
Oh,
Only
yeah.
8, huh?
Tears them up, you know. And I had 31 on mine.
No kidding.
I did have an interesting thing with Chennault. We went to, now France never went to war with Japan. And that was French Indochina in those days, or it's now Vietnam. And they sent me down clear across Jap territory to Pensacola, which was a French fort, to get the women and children out of there. The Japs were getting pretty nervous. And so we left in the middle of the night to get down there at first light. And here come my radio man, big Italian boy from Detroit. All out of breath. And I went back in the blister, you know, and here's a Zero sitting out there. And they just want to know what we're doing, see. They can knock me down anytime they want to, but they never offered to touch me. But they escorted me all the way, see. But when I went over into Vietnam, they turned back then, see.
Because they weren't at war with the French.
No. And don't you think they hadn't intercepted that message that we were going after the women and children, because they'd have knocked me out otherwise. Yeah. And when I got down there, these women and children and a Franciscan priest, and I said, "Okay, 31 of them, see." I said, "One small bag, that's all. I can't haul. I don't know if I can haul you anyway, you know." So when I got down, got to loading, why, Savini, back there and he says, "You better come back here, they're going to sink us." And I went back there, and they're throwing the back of that airplane. It's up there in the water, you know. And I started picking them up and throwing them back. And they stuck their head up, and I said, "No way," you know. And I couldn't talk to them. Only the priest was well educated. And them women, they double-crossed me. So they all started putting extra clothes on. Opened a suitcase. Some of them had fur coats on and everything, you know. And so the priest, he was a pretty sharp dude. And so we got in and brought them back. Well, then finally they gave a fellow who never was down there, you know how these army things work out, got the Croix de Guerre, they call it, the French medal. He got the medal for that. He never had been there. Yeah. And that. Are we in business?
We're in business. So, yeah, Dad used to tell stories about people lined up at the gang factory, you know, 30, 40 people. They're paying 10, 11 cents an hour.
Yeah.
Begging for work.
Yes.
Couldn't hire.
Yeah.
Didn't have any work.
Yeah. And no money to pay them, hardly, you know.
No money to pay them.
Yeah, yes. When I went out on the Kaufman farm, Doc Kaufman out there, east of town, the first fellow was John Green. The house across the road, they just kind of moved into them, those old houses. And he had 2 children, and John Green come and offered to work for me for his milk, and fellas give him an eggs, and 10 cents an hour.
See.
and he plowed up towards Lake Odessa. There was a farm I rented up there, and he plowed all fall on that for 10 cents an hour, you know. Now another fellow, local fellow, came out, and he had 2 little kids. George Bermanstall. The Bermanstall?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, George.
An old truck for us.
Yes.
Here.
Okay. Before that, George came over and said, Claude, could you have any work for me at all? He said, I'll work for 10 cents an hour. And it was in harvest time, and he shocked oats and that sort of thing, and Phyllis gave him milk and eggs and 10 cents an hour, and raised it, and with little kids. Now talk about the bottom of the barrel, you know. And yet he dug himself out and done well. So.
They drove semi-truck for
Yeah.
the mechanic company for a lot of years.
And they were, but these were basically, the bad part about that, these were basically good people, industrious people. They won't come and work for you for 10 cents an hour. Nowadays, with the welfare thing, what it is, you know, they won't work unless they get minimum wage at least, you know. But I really couldn't afford him, but I couldn't afford to turn him down. First of all, I wanted to help him, and I needed the help, you know. And so we washed one another's hands, you might say. And anyway, about this business,
See, we left off, you were in India.
yeah. Well, then, well, after we were over in Okinawa.
Okinawa.
Yes. I was fortunate enough through the Battle of Rangoon and that sort of thing. They awarded me the Distinguished Flying Cross, and they awarded me the Air Medal with 2 oak leaf clusters, which I appreciated. At least somebody knows you're around, you know. And the typhoons were a real lesson. When they hit Okinawa, I remember there used to be a movie actor, Leif Erikson. He had named himself after the great Norwegian. And he was in our tower with a little radio background. And he was putting across to us that the wind is now 70 miles an hour. Now remember, he's in a knocked together tower, carpenter tower, you know. The wind is now 75 miles an hour. And all of a sudden he says, and this station is going off the air. He's getting out of this tower, you know. And our group had winterized, we had a big squad tent. We had winterized it. Floor, framed the door. We're going to stay for the winter. The typhoon struck, and we run into the tombs of the Okinawans, and they built a tomb with an entrance with a curl in it because the wind should never blow on a man's tomb, see? Okay, well, that was a great place to hide. Anyway, I think maybe that might have been their background of it. So we run down in there and just peeked out over the edge, and our tent, when the worst of it hit, rolled over all in one piece. The pressure on the inside was different than outside, see? And that tent rolled over all in one piece. You couldn't see a tent doing that. And then it exploded, you know. And the next day, we were down the line picking our papers off the pine needles, you know. Everything was just gone. We were without supply, and the Navy then brought in some refrigerated barges and just run them ashore, and we'd go down there with trucks and get. So I got a 6x6, got a driver, and we went down there, and you just got in line, and they dropped a landing net of stuff, and you didn't even know what you had in that truck.
Might have been a cigarette.
Yeah, it could be anything, but you was taking it, you know. And I never thought I'd stand in line with colonels and the whole works, all the big ones, to get an orange. We lined up a whole big line of us. We had nothing fresh, you know. And they brought some oranges, and we got refrigerated milk. And then the British had set up a 28th field hospital. And they come and said, you got any men you could spare? Sure, what's up? And those fellows that blowed their tent away the Army tent, and those fellows were laying in their canvas bunks with water in the bunk, you know, with them, the injured. And so we had men over there, and we'd take hold of the end of one of them and tip it up so the water would run out of the guy's bed, you know. And that's the first time that I ever really felt what really the contribution that those nurses made. They worked right through that storm when it was, you know, it wasn't fit for man or beast. And afterwards, after it's all over, and then the medics come and thanks for the help. And I said, how many people you think you lost because of the storm? And he said, we don't think we lost a man. And that's something. And here they got to be in sterile hospitals and perfect conditions, you know. And there that we were pouring the water out of their bunks, you know. But I don't think a germ could have stayed there either, see, so. And
a typhoon, is that kind of like a hurricane?
That's a worse. That's what they have out there that you read about, just blows an island away, you know. And of course, you hear that it blows 10,000 homes down. Of course, a home over there is a bamboo sticks set up and something up against it, see. So when you hear about those disasters, they're bad because they don't have anything, but they're not hurt as bad as we are because they're used to not having anything. And we begin to cry in our beer, you know, and they go out to setting up their village again, you know.
So were you over in Okinawa when the war ended then, or?
No, yeah, it was over. We covered when they were monkeying with the surrender business, you know, and that sort of thing. And then all of a sudden they put out the point system. You got out of the service if you had points enough. Mm-hmm. Well, having her and 3 babies and I'd been in all the theaters, and all of a sudden I got a gaboo of points. Mm-hmm. I and another fellow named Thermal Jarman, Bunky Jarman we called him, he come and he said, Shelley, you and I got the most points, and if we can get on that Coast Guard ship out there, we can go home. And I said, well, I can swim that far, you know. And we went down to the waterfront. Well, it was so terrible rough. And Navy says, CB says, we can't get you out there. There was a kid around there, and I often wondered who he was. He looked like he hadn't shaved, with one of these little flat-nosed landing barges, you know. He said, what do you want out there? And I said, well, if we can get to the General Altman out there, we can go home. I'll take you out there, he said. And he bounced us around and out there, and they wouldn't let a plank down for us or nothing. They just dropped a net over the side, and we crawled up that, and then they welded on that ship for 2 days going home. It was, you know, almost breaking up, and then that was the second typhoon, and then we were on our way home, you know.
Did you go all the way back on that ship, or?
Yeah, we went on, right on, and we got near Hawaii, and the captain announced they were running short on rations. He said we can go short rations, 2 meals a day, or we'll lay over for a week and stock up in Hawaii. And everybody, the whole ship says, go home, you know. Well, they fed us good all the way.
Well, a Coast Guard ship couldn't have been that large, was it?
Oh, yeah. General Altman was a big ship.
Was a big ship?
Yeah, big ship.
Huh.
And so when we got home, we were the first ship to come into Portland, Oregon. And we come 90 miles up the Columbia, and they docked us there, and the town all turned out first guys home, see? And the mayor's down there, and their Red Cross is handing us a newspaper and a bottle of milk and, you know, and fruit and what have you, and then the mayor wants to shake hands with you, and you got your arms full of stuff, you know. And they took us out to the base there at Portland. And here come a guy with a sheath of papers and said, looking for Shellenbarger. And he said, here, take these guys, 2,400 guys who've been on that train in the morning, take them to Chicago. You got to be, yeah, you got to be kidding.
What rank were you by then?
Just the first lieutenant. I lost my captaincy on another deal, but anyway. So I said, well, I got to have a medic. There's that many men on it, you know. You got a medic, Dr. Hollander, his name is, from Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Oh,
and so we're on our way. We got to in Dakotas, and a big Italian boy way up, somebody come told us there's a sick guy up there. We went up the train. He had appendicitis. And he ain't telling nobody he's going home. He don't want to get, you know. And the doctor says, well, we've got to put you off in Fargo. Man, he's ready to fight. He ain't getting off. And here he is, sick as a dog, you know. And so the boys are friends around, you know. And so then they stopped the train, and man, he's ready to do battle. And they backed that paddy wagon up there. They'd called ahead, of course, to get a ambulance. And I said, grab him. And so 4 or 5 of his friends nailed him, and they put him off the. I'll bet he hates me even today, you know.
Might have saved his life.
Oh, sure, had to be. As far as the doc knew, the temperature he had and everything, he could have already been ruptured, you know. We never knew what happened to him or anything. But. And we got into Shepherd Field and over to Chicago, and I turned the papers in. That was the end of mine. And it tells you how the world changes. I'd been on the go for all that time, you know, and I finally got a bus to go home. Kid Greyhound in those days. And here I was bushed, you know, and all this sort of, and I had to stand up all the way home. You know? It always made an impression on me. The war's over, people forget it, you know, and I guess I should have been glad, and I was glad to get home. So I got home, and Phyllis and I bought the farm, and
out by the expressway there.
yeah, and then we had, and she went away right away and had another baby, you know.
Oh, sure.
And
It's all your fault.
yeah.
So is this a boy or a girl?
This is the
Girl.
youngest girl, Diane.
Mm-hmm.
So you got 2 boys and 2 girls?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
We, and so help me, she had no reason to stay with me. I was a free spirit at that time, you
Oh,
know.
sure. With 4 kids.
I was. You wasn't. I said I was.
Yeah.
But she was a guiding light, and
You kept her thumb on you.
and well, it took that much for really make me appreciate it. I know I have been a better person. To think that war does some good, I have been a better person, and the man upstairs really blessed us. We had 4 good kids, and we've had good health. And as we get older, we realize that's all there really is. We could have this room full of money, but if you haven't got your health, you've had it, you know. And so then we farmed, and everything got better. You know, the economy got better, the country got going. Came a winter, and the boys were growing up then pretty much, and I said, I'm going over. They were hiring at the state hospital, just hiring, and needed help. And I said that her and the kids would take care of the chores, and that'll make us some winter income.
What kind of critters do you have on the farm? Were you milking cows?
Oh yeah, we milked cows. Oh yes, we kept beef cattle, and we kept about 100 hogs, and we had a good operation going, and we're doing well. Then we went. I said, I'll go and we'll jack up the income, and so everybody agreed, and we did. And I'm just going to stay for the winter at the hospital. Came spring, and the hospital offered me a better deal. And at the same time, a guy come along and wanted to rent my farm. We said, that's it, you know. And the boys were getting to the age, and the oldest boy went to the service at 17. His mother nearly died for a little bit. She felt like she was signing his death.
Back over it all over again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the youngest boy, then he ain't going to have his brother outdo him. He went in the Marines. You know.
Now, was this during the Vietnam War or a little before the Vietnam War?
Oh, yeah, he was...
He went there 3 times.
Yeah. Gary was there.
Gary.
stationed there. He used to be a courier too, where they used to chain and send you someplace with it, you know. And he said all they did was, if they wanted to cut your arm off, see, there's no problem there. And but anyway, and there again, we were blessed.
They made it back, all right.
Oh yeah, and he done well. He went as high as an enlisted man can go in the service, and then the youngest boy went in the Marines and got this deal with Felt. Was a
what are their names now? The one that was
Gary is the oldest boy, and
he's the one that went to Vietnam.
yes, well, he's been all over the world. He spent a lot of time in Italy. And he lived all over with a family.
How
England.
many years did you say he was
30 years.
in the Air Force?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And he liked it. And then the youngest boy went in the Marines, and he had
That's
Greg, and he had a pretty good deal. Then the oldest girl is Linda, and she went to Lake Odessa, and then to Ferris, and now she's a dean up there at Ferris, so she's done well. And Diane is kind of a unique thing happened with Diane. She applied to work for the state, and they hired her, and she went to work at Ionia at exactly the same job that I started at over there, in the same building, the same thing. And when she walked in, people said, "We know who you are," you know, by looking at her.
Now you didn't finish. You were going to work there 1 year.
Yeah. So
How
I
many
stayed
years did you work there?
30 years.
30 years.
And it was and they, every time I thought that's enough of it, they upped the ante a little, you know. And but of course, then we had got rid of our equipment and rented our farm. And then the thing we wanted to do, and it helped us, then we could travel some. See, we didn't have livestock, so then when we had we could pile up our vacation in those days. And then her and I got to come into Florida, and because we had been here during the war, and she liked it down here, and so did I, and so then we would spend all of our vacations down here, and gradually gravitated to where we are.
No, at the hospital, weren't you in charge of food service, or?
I was 15 years in charge of that, and then I was 15 years in charge of maintenance.
Oh, yeah.
And when I retired, I was maintenance superintendent, and but it was good to me, very good to me, and I had some awfully nice guys working for me. Some of them you might know, like Wally Barber,
Oh, yeah.
and Larry Hoffman, and a lot of those good men. You know, it makes you a good guy. I had good men. All of a sudden, I'm a winner. See?
You know, one thing you did that I recall is when you cleared that field there along the 7
Yeah.
Mile Road. Man, that was a task.
Yes, yeah. And I, yeah.
You got to remember
Yeah, oh,
that.
sure. But we done that. I just done that on off times. Just kept
Pecking
away at it until I got it down where I had to hire heavy equipment, and we finished.
To come in, knock the
Yeah,
stumps out.
to finish it and cleaned it up.
You recovered quite a little land.
Oh,
there,
yeah.
didn't
We well, to begin with, it had always been horse farmed and all that sort of thing, and so each year, whatever finances we had extra, we would do something. And I remember one field we buried 7 big stone piles in one field, you know, and that sort of thing. The house at the farm is the original log house. It's built out that was a tamarack swamp where the muck is. And then, of course, when you drain it with water out of it, the tamarack die, you know. They're about like the cypresses down here.
You got to have a lot of water.
Yeah, and the house is the original log house, and it's made out of tamarack, and they had sawed them on 2 sides, 10 inches, and then their logs the other way, you know.
And you sighted it.
And it's been her family, and then her and I, and so forth, and the walls are about that thick, you know.
I recall in 57, the one year I was a field man, that you grew some peas.
Yeah.
Mechanic on me.
Oh, several years I did. What was he? Shetterly was the field man.
Yeah.
No,
Or not Phil, Dale.
Dale Shetterly, yes. And we growed peas when Fred Burns used to mow them with a mowing machine and a tractor, and
Viner stations.
yeah, and the viner was up to the brick house where Billy Allen
Pretty
is.
close to where your place.
Yes, and they had a huge stack up there, and they were Puerto Ricans. Your dad had got in to work, lived in that brick house
Yeah,
up there,
yeah.
and I worked. I helped Alf Hazel when your dad first started draining some of that, and it had places where tile had bricked, and so I'd go over at odd times, and I liked old Alf and work with him. And
That farmer? They call
yeah, Farmer Hazel, and he was an expert with tile.
Oh, yeah.
And then we were in quite a deep hole, and that's got some water sand under it, and a little hard to work with. And your dad came down and says, "Alf, now, could you use any help? You know, I'll get you. I got men up here. I get you some help." And Alf, he kind of mumbled something. He wouldn't stop and talk with you when he's working. He said, "You want to visit? Come Sunday when I ain't busy." So Alf and I are working along, and here come two of these Puerto Rican fellows. Now, they'd never seen a tile laid, you know. And one of them had a pail, and the other one didn't have anything with him, see. And Alf looked up, and how in the hell you going to, you know how he talked, how you going to tile with a pail, you know. So he sent them on their way. Pretty soon your dad came back, driving back down the field there, and he said, "Well, Alf, didn't those men come help you?" He said, "Don't send me no more of them Puerto Ricans." He said, "No more of them Puerto Ricans."
Puerto Ricans.
Yeah. So Alf he was one of Lake Odessa's. Do you know that was an educated man, Alf Hazel? That he was one time postmaster at Bonanza?
Is that right?
Yeah.
I know he was.
And
he started out laying tile with a spade, they said.
Oh yeah, him and I worked for him as a kid, and he'd say, "Shellenbarger," he said, "you don't dig a ditch, you dig a hole." You know, he would have that so true. And
So true,
yeah. And he had a tile spade. He had ground the sides down on, you know, and he took out just so much, and he would take out his share of the cut and bottom it and lay the tile, and I couldn't keep up, you know.
I used to.
Little man that big.
Well, he was a little.
Yeah.
Guy. I used to go when I was in high school to Swanson's pool hall and watch him play billiards. He was a real good billiard.
And he'd sit in there and play cards.
Oh, love to play
You know,
cards.
it's too bad you didn't have something like this then. There was people like the Mexican, what was his name?
Jim Luna?
No, the other family you mentioned a minute ago.
Oh,
Contreras.
Contreras.
Yeah.
Old man Contreras and Alf Hazel and Allen's great-grandfather there. Raj Allen's great-grandfather. Vera Ed Lane.
Ed Lane.
Yeah. And Bert McDonald. And there was half a dozen of those old guys that played euchre. And they knew exactly how everybody played. You know? And they used to play about 2 cards, throw their cards in. You know, and I was just a kid, and they hadn't got the game going, and they know how it's going to go.
Yeah.
You know? And old Contreras there, what'd they call him? Anyway.
Wasn't Gabe, was it?
No.
That was on the boys.
Yeah. Joe Contreras. And but he was the kind, and George Swanson was running the pool room.
George is a character.
Yeah, and George was a sharp dude, and he'd kind of keep track. You know, when he was supposed to pay, he lost. He'd never have the money out there, one thing or the other. So then he'd win a game, and they want a chip, you know, like they used to get. And George would always go like that and stick it in his pocket, see? And things like that. That all happened, and the average guy never knew it, you know. It was part of those characters.
Part of their deal.
And George Robinson used to come in there, probably the strongest man ever around Lake Odessa. and there used to be young men sitting on the stools along there. And all of them that knew anything would stand up. But the new guy, George would come along and lay his hand on your knee, and you ever anybody that can really squeeze it? And somebody turned snow white, you know, George. Hi, you know. The guy just, oh, George was so terrible strong.
That's not the guy that had the meat market.
No, no. George Robinson was, lived out at the Jog on the Road, and then Hazel Nopke lives on the farm now out there. And that was the route. That's the highest point in Ionia County.
Is it really
yes,
right there?
Right there.
My good friend Dick Bittner was killed right at that jog.
Oh, was he?
1974.
There's been a few. He, George Robinson, the tiles and everything run both ways from there, towards Grand River. And you get to thinking about it. It don't seem right. But when you leave there, you start dovetailing down towards clear to the lakes.
You know that Dalton farm out
Yeah.
right across the house? I can remember when my dad, we'd be driving by there, and he'd say, Bob, he said, I had a chance to buy that farm back during the Depression for next to nothing.
Yeah?
And he
Yeah.
said, I'm so sorry that I
Oh,
didn't
yeah.
scrounge up some money. He said,
Yeah.
That's the prettiest farm. That
Yeah.
farm lays better than any farm in
Yeah.
Ionia County.
And,
you know, we ran into Mr. Dalton at the...
yes, he was at the breakfast, yeah.
I couldn't believe
Yeah.
that he was still...
Now, I used to go to, I and Charlie Coppice, I was a little bit older than Charlie, but I used to go to Sunfield with my grandparents, and then I always went and stayed with the Coppices. And Charlie was a young man then, you know. And I really was misplaced in that group. You know how big Charlie was and all them guys. And we used to, that's where I got into boxing, was that George, his brother, was real good and very clever and very cordial.
So you did some boxing?
And they used to, and they'd make me a punching bag, you know. And
did you do any boxing in the service like Jack
well,
did?
they wouldn't let us. The minute I played some football, well, when you hit flying status, you can't do any of those.
Can't do anything.
And it makes sense, you know.
No.
And so that's
You got a lot, like you said, they got a lot of money in that.
oh yeah, no. And see, when I went into San Antone, my bunkmate was Eno Slaughter. You remember Eno Slaughter?
Yeah.
And he was a hillbilly boy, and he joined the cadets so he could play in that last World Series is all. Then they put him in there, and hell, he wouldn't make his bed, he wouldn't sweep his anything, had it all in his mind what he's going to do, you know. And they took us all up in front of shrinks, of course. That's one of the first places you go when you go into flying cadet. And they just had shrinks sitting in chairs with blankets between. They said, Eno, what makes you think you want to fly? I don't want to fly. He says, I just wants to play baseball. He was a Carolina hillbilly, you know. And did that shrink ever read in the riot act? He said, you know how much they've already tied up in you and how bad the country needs people. I don't care. I just wants to play baseball. So they washed him out right away. Then when we were out there pop-tooing and hupping, he was out with special services playing baseball. And he played in Italy and all over, you know.
Did you ever have any contact with the guys you had in your crew, or any of the guys in your squadron?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Have any reunions or get-together?
Oh, yes. We've been to, I guess her and I have been to 3 different reunions. And they go, there's several PBY associations. We went to Scottsdale, Arizona to one. It brings you back to reality. It was going to be with Chennault's Flying Tigers and that group. So her and I went out there, beautiful place. And I said, now don't be too surprised to her, because these guys don't know what laws are or anything else, you know, that old Flying Tiger group. They were all mercenaries mostly, you know. At 9 o'clock, there wasn't even any lights on. They were in wheelchairs and walking with crutches, and she says, where's that wild bunch you was telling about? I'd forgot that they got 80 years old.
Yeah, they were older than you guys.
Yeah, they were a little older than we were. And so then we went to, a couple of years ago, to a nice one down at Biloxi. And her and I enjoyed the beach and what have you, but they're old men,
Yeah,
old men. And then when we go to, they're having one yearly at Peoria, Illinois now, and but they're old men.
I don't know how you stay so young looking. I know you lead the exercise deal over at your park. How many places are there in your park? I know it's a big park.
Yeah, about somewhere around 900. I guess.
900. And you lead the exercise
Yeah.
class how many days a week?
5 days a week.
Just 5 days
Yeah.
a week.
I used to have 2 classes, but she kind of finally says you're nuts, you know.
Put her thumb
2
down.
a day. No, but she don't do that. She's the power of suggestion.
Are you sure in great shape?
But we know it, we need it, and so we do it kind of selfishly.
Mm-hmm.
And then, in what year would that been? When I was a sophomore, junior, between sophomore and junior, when Dick Nye died of polio,
I remember that.
Well, you see, I had polio.
Well, did you?
Oh, yes. And then that has made me really want, and I'm the only one of the whole group that didn't have
Paralysis and everything.
damage of some kind outside of Phyllis that affected my head a little bit. But
Yeah.
it did, yeah. But I think the rest of them have, and it saved me. Dick, I was working with Tony McCall's thrash machine, and they come out and said they want you for a pallbearer for Dick Nye. And I said, you got to be kidding, He was the best-looking guy in school, and nice, tall, good-looking guy,
Yeah.
And they
That
said,
was a shame. I was pretty young when that happened.
but couldn't have saved him probably, but his folks are Christian Science, and they wouldn't let a doctor touch him until he was a pretzel. When they finally got Doc Huffs to go up there, Doc Huffs really read him the riot act because he couldn't do anything for him. Well, then,
I'd forgotten they were Christian Science.
yeah, well, then, it's kind of weird, isn't it, running a drugstore?
I know.
Isn't it? That's
is.
very different, isn't it? But anyway, then Barney Nielsen and Neil Rose,
Martha.
and Martha Nye, she had one leg
I
bad.
remember that.
Then Neil Rose's wife, and her always carried her head like
I
that.
bet her head too.
Yeah, okay. And then Barney Nielsen, and he never had good health after that. Let's see, who else? There was 5 of us.
I know something else I was going to ask
And
you.
myself, and by the time I was the first day of school, I would sit in Wahlberg's class and go to sleep. Well, not unusual in the middle of the year, but at the first day of school, I finally went up to her and I said, I don't feel good. It'd be all right if I leave. And she said, I watched you back there. She said, you better go see the doctor. I was never that drunk in my whole life. I couldn't stay on the sidewalk getting down to Peabody's office. He took one look at me and run right out the back door and into Hoff's office. Hoff was brand new in town. Come over, and they took me up to Chase's hospital up there and done a spinal puncture. And I remember Doc Peabody saying to Dr. Huff's, Peabody had never done one. You see, he was of the old school. He said, can you do a spinal puncture? And Huff said, yes. They done it, and they're counting it right side of my bed there. And he said, it's too money for spinal meningitis. It's polio. Doc Kaufman, my uncle, young Doc's dad there, was around there. They said, you go to the Sunshine Hospital, which is up to Grand Rapids there. You know where it is? Kent County facility now. And we'll call them, and they'll have a serum for you and get it up there and back as quick as you can. And took me home out to the farm. He came back, and they got a double dose, and they put it in this arm or the other until it wouldn't take anymore, and they put the rest of it in this arm. And it gave me an artificial fever. And my mother had a new Sears and Roebuck mattress on the bed, and I sweat the shape of me right through it.
Is that right?
I lost 11 pounds right there. Then run along a while, and they told me what I could and couldn't do, but I had already tried it. They said I'd never walk again, see. Old Doc Peabody, nice old guy, and he sat in the front room out at the farm, and he said, Claude, get up and come out here. Nobody'd ever seen me on my feet, you know. And I got up and I walked nearly out there. My knees was wagging, you know. And the old Peabody sat there and the tears run right down off his face, and he said, we made it. We done it. But by the rest of them having it, it got them, and this serum was working part of the time.
I was going to say that wasn't.
No, it wasn't a cure. It was, and what they were doing was giving you an artificial fever to kill this. See. So then, from then on, I guess, the reason I never smoked, drank, and I've always tried to keep in good shape. I kind of feel like I've been blessed, you know, and I just can't waste it. That's all. But do you remember Aubrey Wade?
No.
Aubrey Wade, Hal Wade, and what was his brother's name? Younger.
Hal. No.
Anyway.
Rex.
Rex Wade. Anyway, they finally told the kids they could come out and visit me. But they had to stand outside the window, and they had gauze on the window, you know. It's mosquito net. And Aubrey, like, he's just a kid, you know, and he said, don't know what to say, and he said, "Gol, Claude, I heard you's dead." My mother could have kicked his feet right on. That's the first kid I saw with him, and I never forget that.
You mentioned Rex. Didn't you have a cousin, Rex?
Rex and Roy Shellenbarger.
And
Rex was, and Roy joined the service just before Pearl Harbor. Then they were going to ship them. They were going to shore up the defenses at the Philippines at that time, and they were going to. And Rex came down with the measles, a set of twins, and Roy, they shipped him. Then he got caught in the Philippines, and he was in the Death March.
The Tom Death March.
Yeah, and then he was in Manila. And then when Manila fell, I was in the Philippines, and I flew down to Nichols Field and went into town, and they told me that those guys were at the prison there where they'd been held, and that the Red Cross was in there and the medics. So I went down there, got there, and the Red Cross had the records, and I asked for him, and they said, well, he just had died this last week. And they took me over and showed me where he'd been in prison. And that big building, it had been a Tobias prison. Anyway, it had been a public building, and it had a porch, cement porch out on it, you know, with legs on it. They had just divided that off, and it was about 4 feet tall. And those guys couldn't stand up, and there was no floor in it, dirt, wet, you know.
They were underneath the porch?
Yes, that was part of the
porch.
That was the cells, part of the cells with the Japs. See? And then he died.
He's lucky he survived the Death March.
Well, I don't know as he was. He had to suffer a lot more. See?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. And so when I came home, why I never told Dave or his wife. What would be the point in that? See? They couldn't do anything about it, and so I just didn't have the heart to say anything about it, you know. And we were all in the same grade in school,
And then,
Rex and Roy. And
Rex survived.
And Rex stayed in the Air Force, retired in Las Vegas, and he's died since now. Yeah, we were the same age. He was. You remember? You don't remember old Dave Shellenbarger, his dad, little short guy around town.
I don't think so.
It goes on and on, you know. But it's an experience that I guess it helped me, and maybe it's trying to tell me something, because I really settled down, and I think I appreciated her even more, and I appreciated my kids. You know, when I was in the Philippines, that first started, I was getting pretty damn lonesome, homesick. In the Philippines, when we run the Japs out, then we set up a food tent, and the little kids would come with number 10 cans, and they would take anything we didn't eat. They didn't have no money, no food, you know. And so then the GIs, Americans, I'll give them more credit than people do, but when they see that, well, then we took everything the cook cooked, and he must have thought he had the world on. I remember they had a lot of canned broccoli, and it's hard to get soldiers to eat it. They took every bit he cooked. He thought he had the world's best recipe. And you stand right outside where we had garbage cans, and then you had they have a heater that sits right in a garbage can, and they boil that water with a solution, and you dip and then you dip it in the boiling water. And so, hell, there's never anything in the garbage can, you know. The guys would all take extra bread and everything, you know. And these little kids, to put us to shame a little bit, they stand in line, hungry, never push, shove, or fight one another. And when you give one something, and he'd take right off for home, share it with his family. I'm afraid that wouldn't happen here, you know. Doesn't happen. And that sort of thing. They wrote a nice article in the Detroit Free Press about me, about while I was over there, and all these kids around, and I had kids, you know. I went to special services, and they did have a bat and a ball, softball. And I and another guy went out, and we just laid out a diamond, and we're going to play ball, you know. We had 100 kids to play ball, you know. But the thing that touches you, that these kids, and those little buggers run and play and holler and yell, you know, it does your heart good. We were getting ready for the invasion of Okinawa, and right over the revetment was the rifle range. And every time the machine guns would go off, those kids would all, every one to them, hit the deck.
Hit the deck, yeah.
Okay, and then it hits you. That's war, you know. These little guys, we didn't even hit the deck, you know. They just bang. They wouldn't be a kid standing up. And they'd look all around, jump up, and go right back to playing. You know? Now, how can you get your mind so regimented, you know? Just bang. So I got back, they interviewed me, and that's what I told them about, was that that's the thing that made the biggest impression on me.
You certainly had quite a career there. Quite a life, really.
And so fortunate, you know. So very fortunate.
Like you say, you've had good health.
And now our colonel, I never found out until Colonel Prim, a West Pointer, was our colonel. And I just found out that he's up in Oregon, and he got amoebic dysentery. And he used to get it in the Far East, you know. And he's never been able to throw it. And so he don't know good health.
Well, Jack Lambert, you know, got dysentery in German prisoner of war camp,
yeah.
And he never could throw it.
No. And that amoeba, you know, is a bug goes through your body. And but most generally, and a lot of guys got careless. And that's one thing, her and I, when we traveled or anything, if they warned us about something, we do it.
They warned you about the water?
In Mexico or anywhere, yeah. You bet. And but here's Colonel Prim, and he'd get a little careless. He liked to drink a little bit, and ate something that he shouldn't, you know. Marked him for the rest of his life.
Well, listen, I guess that just about covers everything.
Yeah, that's too much,
so,
actually.
Sure appreciate it.
And well, I'm glad you took the time. I would like to buy one for my grandchildren, because they can't even visualize.
How many grandchildren do you have, Claud?
Well, one to be, just let them pass it around. They'll take better care of it that way. And I'd like my children to have one, and maybe the same one. And they're
well,
4. We got 8 grandchildren, 4 children. They're all sissies. She had 4 kids and raised them, and they never have only 2.
Yeah, they say that's enough.
They said after they had 2, they
our
said...
kids never got married until they were, Doug, what, 31? And
no kidding, they...
Amy was, what, 35. Brett was almost 40 when he got married.
Yeah,
He was 38 when he got married.
You know, actually, two could live cheaper than one. In the heart of the Depression, we just made, her and I struck it off pretty good.
Bed filler.
Oh, yeah. He keeps you warm. He's probably getting you off air.
No, he's not. No.
He likes to cuddle.
Oh, good boy.
That's one thing.
You're
We
a good
miss.
boy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
You can't have dogs over there?
no.
No.
See, this outer perimeter, you can have dogs.
Oh, is that, well,
The
There's one
outside.
street over here with half of it can have dogs. It's real towards the back.
I've been
the one
cold
next to us,
since
Palmetto,
the weather's
that
been
part
Yeah.
is like,
That's
told
too
me
chilly
they
now.
have
I
and they
No,
have a
no.
area, animal area, big area,
Warm.
cut off by
Yeah,
itself,
well,
and that's
I
an animal
put on
area.
long
That's a
things
nice
in the
way to
morning,
handle it, you
and
know.
then I
Mhm.
switch,
And,
then
Yeah.
then they own their
about
property,
this
and
time of day or a little later,
we have been
Yeah.
very tempted to accept our age kind of
Yeah.
is
She
against it.
says that's the last one we're going to have.
What's that?
Dog.